Thanks for clicking on my video. My name is Tina Williams. I'm a Stampin' Up demonstrator based in Australia. In this video, I'm going to run you through the process of making the card on screen. I will touch on watercolouring using Stampin' Up classic ink pads. I will show you a few creative ways that I use my stamps. We're going to have a little bit of embossing and we're going to round it out with a few touches of texture. Are you ready to get inky? Now the first stamp that we're going to use is By the Bay. I'm actually going to be using the bottom corner stamp for the main feature. Inside I'm going to use the pigeons and the greeting at the very top. What I've done is I have attached the image to my Stamparatus and I'm stamping it onto some shimmer white paper. I've just inked that up in Versamark and I'm going to do some gold embossing. I always have a paintbrush handy so that I can wipe off any excess powder that is remaining on the card. Now what I'm doing is I'm heat embossing the gold, and I actually emboss from behind my cardstock. I always find like it makes it pop. Now it's time to move on to the watercolouring. I'm actually going to press down my ink pad. I'm using Balmy Blue. I'm going to scribble Mint Macaroon Marker, Pear Pizzazz, Basic Grey, Smoky Slate, Grey Granite, Sierra Sand and Crumb Cake. I would say it's personal preference. When I'm colouring as landscape, I always start with my sky. So as you can see, I'm using some of the Balmy Blue from the top. I've mixed it with some water so that I've got a really watered down palette to start with. And I'm just tracing around the exterior of the building and the landscape. It's always important to lay down a good foundation of colour. You don't want to start off too dark because once the colour's down, it's a lot harder to lift it up. So if you start with more watered down tones, you can always come back in and add more depth once the actual colour has dried, which is the beauty of watercolour. I'm definitely not an expert at watercolouring. I enjoy watercolouring, I find it relaxing, but I might not have all the technical skills. I just want to share with you what I do when I go to watercolour. Now what I've decided to do is I'm just going to go in a little bit tighter so you can actually see a little bit closer what I've been doing. Now the downside to this shot is you're not seeing the way that I'm mixing my colours on my palette, but it just gives you a little bit of idea how I fly over different sections. Those with a keen eye may have noticed that I did have a change with my paintbrush. This is actually a liner, and in this shot I've actually gone back to I think a number 5 round brush, and I've zoomed back out so you can see the way that I'm mixing their colours, and that's kind of important when I'm working on the rocks and the stone. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing a lot of the neutral tones. So I've added some soft suede ink to my colour palette. I just felt like the tones that I had originally selected lacked that sandy tone that you would see in sandstone, rock, along a seaside. That I'm using and the markers are from Stampin' Up and they're dye based. Stampin' Up call them a classic ink. They're what I use for 99% of my stamping. I just love that I have the option also to use them for my watercolouring. Now what I've done is I've pressed them down onto my glass craft mat. If you don't have a work surface like that, you could use like a dinner plate or a saucer. In my classes we actually use clear blocks, so we'll press an ink pad onto the clear block and use that to pick up the colour. Some people press the ink pads together and pick up colour from the lid. I personally don't do that because I do mix lots of my colours together and I never want to contaminate. But I'd love to hear in the comments how you actually mix your colours and if you've got any tips that you can share with me. As we move into the greenery section, so the trees and the grass, I've added in a little bit of old olive ink and I have actually gone for the ink pad. I will have to say where I started off scribbling down some markers, I have found that I wasn't getting enough tone using just the markers, and the ink pad do give you that little bit more ink and juiciness. So I would probably recommend using an ink pad over the markers. So I must say, I didn't realise how long it takes to make a card or even watercolour. we are finally getting towards the end of this watercolouring, I promise you. So what I've done now is it's just dried, and I'm just going over and just kind of touching up some places that I feel I need that little bit more tone, a little bit more colour, and I promise then we will be done. Well, with that at least. So now we're getting INKy. We are applying white crafting ink directly to the watercolour that we've just painstakingly coloured. You can see the difference between the two colours here. It just gives it a really, really muted look. I'm preparing that layer to do some embossing. So over the top, I'm swiping the embossing buddy. We're actually going to use the postscript background. And I've just inked up in Sierra Sand. I've stamped it off, and now I'm going to put on some Versamark. Now I don't use a block. I just put down my stamp, and where I put my fingers is where I get the stamp impression. I didn't want that image completely covering that layer. I just wanted a pop in the corner. Now that is clear embossing powder, and because I use that little bit of Sierra Sand with Versamark, it means I'll get a little bit of a dirty tone when we actually heat it up. So like with the gold, I'm heating from behind, and I always find that just makes it pop. Now, and there you can see what it looks like. Just a really subtle detail on that corner. On the back of the same corner, I'm actually just doing a wash of Balmy Blue. And I've just pressed down the Balmy Blue ink pad, brought in some water, and just diluted it down. I'm now rolling that corner over, and so that's why I coloured it, just so that there would be blue showing through. Now, one of my favourite products ever, linen thread, and no card is complete without a bit of linen thread. Just a quick little bow. I normally do a double wrap around, and just make sure you pull your bow nice and tight. I am mildly embarrassed at how dirty that clear block is. I do apologise, it clearly needs clean. I have stamped the greeting in Versamark, and I'm dropping some gold embossing powder over the top. Wiping away the excess powder, which shows I should have used my embossing buddy. I've heated it up with my heat tool, and now using the best guillotine ever made, the Tim Holtz Tonic Trimmer. Not a Stampin' Up product, the best cutter ever. And I actually use that also just for my little score lines on my greeting, as you can see there. This product is retired from Stampin' Up. It was a banner punch, maybe 5 years old, possibly my most used punch. You can just see how handy and wonderful it is. We are going to use the Artisan Textures stamp in a very interesting way. As you can see, I am swiping the stamp, not stamping the stamp. So I am inking it up in Sierra Sand, stamping off to the side a few times, and actually just swiping it down my cardstock. And what it's doing is it's creating like a grungy texture. No idea how I came up with that idea, but I think I've actually invented a technique all by myself. The white craft ink is making its second appearance of the show as I rub it over the gingham gala paper, and this is actually Pear Pizzazz cardstock, and later I'll show you the difference in the tone, especially with the cardstock, when you do actually have the white over the top and it's quite muted. Now I'm back with my embossing buddy. I'm swiping it over the top. Again, we're going to repeat the embossing process with the... So I've got the postscript return to where I'm inking it up in the Sierra Sand, and I'm going to stamp it off onto my scrap paper. Come back in with my Versamark. This time you can see I'm doing the whole stamp because I've got a larger area. Again, keeping it off the block, so just where I put my fingers is where I'm going to get that stamp impression. The clear embossing powder, which I have put over the entire surface. I'm using my heat tool to set the embossing powder, and you can see how I have just got pops of the stamp, and that really is the beauty of not having it on a block and just putting the pressure just where you want small sections to be. And here just shows you what it looks like. Now this is the subtle embossing folder. I've just gone to the big shot, come back, and I can just see how I've just added that texture using that fantastic embossing folder. I've attached that layer to a piece of Balmy Blue cardstock, and I'm just trimming it so a really, really fine border. And now I'm attaching it to that Pear Pizzazz cardstock. It's really, really interesting at the colour difference. So I'm just flipping them over. Look at what it looks like without having any ink applied over the top. Okay, we are on the home stretch. I've just added that to some Whisper White cardstock, and I'm trimming that to a really fine border. I do a lot of double layers on most of my cards. I just love that extra fine detail around the outside. And we finish up as I attach the main panel to the card with some Stampin' Dimensionals. That is what the finished card looked like mounted onto some CRSN cardstock. Inside, which I have saved you the agony of watching me colour, I've added some additional images just to show you some of the details that possibly didn't come through so well in the recording. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. And if you have any crafty friends who you think would enjoy, please share it with them. Thank you for watching.